Hello, and welcome to my show on interpersonal communication. My name is Dr. Marquita Byrd. My students refer to me as Dr. B. I am a professor emeritus at San Jose State University, which means I'm retired. But as most retired people, you can't just stop working. And I wanted to take this retirement time to share with you the kinds of things that I share with my students for a 45-year career. I wanted to help our community to be better, our relationships to be better. So my goal is twofold today. The first one is that I want to help you to gain information that will allow you to have more effective interpersonal relationships across the lifespan. This is knowledge that you don't use just today but also tomorrow. Lastly, I'm hoping that you will acquire the skills and knowledge that would allow you to do that. So those are the two things that I'm trying to do today. Specifically today, we're going to talk about language. Language is very, very important. I say that about all my topics because they are, to me, they're all very important. Language is very important, and the better we can use language, the better our lives will be. Now, in an earlier video, I talked about relationships. At the beginning, I talked about interpersonal relationships, and that a relationship is simply a pattern of communication across time. And that pattern is evidenced by our verbal and nonverbal communication. One of the things that can make our relationships better is the language that we use when we talk to other people. Also, though, language when used inappropriately can kill a relationship. There's the saying that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's not true. Sticks and stones may break your bones, and words can hurt you too. And the harm from words that are used inappropriately can last a lifetime. In fact, they're so important that in the state of Missouri, which is my home state, they actually have legislation against verbal abuse. And parents can be sued, and there have been parents sued, who use excessive verbal abuse with their children. So language is important. Now, when we talk about it in the family, let's talk about it in the work setting. Language, the way you talk to people, the language that you use at work. There's certain language, for example, that we shouldn't be using at work, depending on the workplace. The language that you use depends on the workplace. But if we're going to stay professional, there's certain type of language we use. Hiring, wow, I can't even say enough about getting hired. When you're going to job interviews, you need to know the appropriate language. And we're mainly talking about mainstream English. We're talking about your formal English. We're talking about the English you use at the bank. We're talking about your classroom English. That's what you should be using in an interview, because they are judging you based on the way you communicate. So language is important in every situation we're in. Let's get a definition of language. We keep talking about it. Language is simply a system of symbols that we use to interact with each other. A symbol is something that we use to represent something else. A symbol is something that might sound like gobbledygook. Let me give you an example. This thing that I'm standing behind is called a podium. In our society, we call it a podium. Some may call it a lectern, but that's what we call it. But what we call it has nothing to do with what it really is. We simply just, in our society, agreed we're going to call this thing podium. So it's the word podium then stands for this thing. So when we say podium to someone, then we have a similar idea of something that a person stands behind to give a speech. That's what a symbol is. I like to say names are symbols. For example, when I hear someone say Marquita Byrd, that means they're talking about me. Although, on Facebook, I found out that there are a lot of Marquita Byrds in America. A lot of them. But if you're in my presence and you say Marquita Byrd, I take that to mean myself. I have a cousin who's named Dwight. So when I say Dwight, I have a certain person that comes to mind when I say that name. Another one whose name is Julius. So when I say Julius, then his picture comes to my mind when I say his name. But basically, a symbol is something that stands for something else. And it could be names, it could be labels. For example, a piece of fruit that I eat that's very furry and is pink and yellow, I might use the label peach. And that means that when I say that word peach, I'm talking about that fruit, and hopefully that comes to mind. When I say orange, I'm eating an orange, there's a certain type of fruit that comes to mind because I use that label. So labels are very, very important. Now let me just talk a few moments about what we're going to talk about today. We talked about a definition of symbol, but we're going to talk about one, language and its use and the fact that we use it to label things. Two, labels and the thing that they represent are separate. They're not the same thing. Three, derogatory language is destructive. And four, words have power. Words have power. And I can't say that enough times. Let's talk about language as a label. Language is used to label our relationships and group membership. For example, I work with my son a lot in terms of how he labels relationships with people. When he was younger, anybody that he knew and liked or had positive interactions with, he said was his friend. That's my friend. And in America, we tend to have that notion, everybody is our friend. Well, the truth is that everybody is not our friend, and we shouldn't start labeling everything as friend. Some people are just acquaintances, and some people are actually strangers. So we can't call everybody a friend. And I had to work with him to make him understand that everybody that you know is not your friend. But that's a label that we use. We use the word family to reference people who are connected to us by blood, by law, or by choice. And hopefully all of us has a family. If we don't, then I'm hoping that you will acquire one. Friends. Friends are people that we're acquainted with in an intimate way. They know our name, we know theirs, we know some things about them. Lovers, classmates. Classmates have a special category. Work relationships. We call them co-workers, church members, associates and strangers. Those are just some of the ways that we can label relationships. And the label that you give them determines how you should behave in the relationship. If you say that you're a family member, you have different expectations because we label that relationship family. You're my family. For this weekend, for example, I'm going to get to see my brother's son. My brother's son is my nephew. And so I have certain feelings for him because he is my nephew. So language is used to label our relationships, label our group membership, and even label our feelings. What is it that we're feeling with people? One of the things that we make a mistake is that we label people according to race. And we start out, I have some friends who say, well, I know these people, they're black, but they're really nice. As though being black is the pejorative thing. Or I have these friends and they're white, but they're really nice. Labeling people by race is one of the most inaccurate things we can do, because race means nothing. Race is a construct that we use to talk about something that changes among human beings, but race doesn't really exist. But we label people by race, and then we attach certain meaning to that, and that is a mistake in our language use. My second point is that language provides symbols for things, but they're not the same thing. Number one, words are arbitrary. Words mean nothing except what they label in our reality. So therefore, we don't need to argue over things like, well, I call that a tomato, you call it a tomato. I call it a potato, you call it potato. Those are arbitrary things that change from culture to culture, community to community. In the South, you will hear people say, I want a soda pop. That's what they call a Pepsi, a soda pop. Whereas in other communities, they may say, I want a soda. Or one of the most intriguing things I ever heard that I never heard of before, I went to live in Mississippi a few years ago, and someone said, I'm going to make groceries. And I thought, make groceries? Boy, that's going to be laborious. And what they meant was, I'm going to shop for groceries. But it was not for me to say, oh, you're saying that incorrectly. That was for me to understand that's what it meant in that community. Labels are arbitrary, and we choose them based on our community and our culture, but they're not tied to reality. Wow, what an important concept. The second one, under language provides symbols, is that the map is not the territory. The map, what is that? Why are you talking about that with language? Language is the map that we use to describe our reality. Language is the map that we use to describe what we're experiencing. And therefore, but we have to remember that it's not the territory. Some of you, if you're over 30, may have actually used a paper map, and you realize that there are mistakes on the map. Sometimes roads have changed. It's not at scale. The directions may be printed on it wrong. Things that existed there last year are not there this year, and it doesn't have all the detail. That's the same thing with language. When we speak and we use language, things change. For example, the stuff on my cheeks used to be called rouge, and then it was called cheek color. Today it's called cheek color, but it's had various uses there. So the map is not the territory. Don't get upset when someone talks about something and it doesn't exactly match reality, because language can't totally match reality. The third thing is the word is not the thing. There's an organization called People, Not Words. And we tend to treat people as though they are the words we use to label them. For example, I never told my son that he was retarded. That was a word that we did not use in my house because it's a pejorative word, it's a negative word, and it certainly didn't describe him. So we never used retarded. Now, as he got older, he realized that he didn't learn the same way as other people, and he learned that term retarded, and he brought it home from school. And I was able to sit down with him and say, no, you're not retarded, which means you're slow, but you learn differently. And wow, isn't that a better way to say it? Because we all learn differently. All of us learn in different ways. So we don't want to treat the person as if they are the word we use to label them, because people are much more than the labels. And we need to remember that. Fourth, meanings are in people, not in words. When we're talking, my dad used to do this. He would talk, and sometimes I wouldn't understand what he was saying. And he was saying, well, I told you X, Y, and Z, why don't you understand it? Well, because the words don't mean anything except how the listener is translating them. And so instead of us having conflicts about how we talk about things and the words that we use, we need to remember that meaning is only residing in the person who's speaking and the person who's listening. And as we come together in our conversation, we come to have shared meaning. But the words themselves are only in the people, not in the meanings are not in the words, they're only in the people. I want to say again that the meanings are not in the words, they're only in the people. Now, if you want to learn more about meanings, you can go to a dictionary, and everyone should have one, and learn more about meanings to have your language to be more precise. So far, we've talked about, number one, language is a label that it provides labels that we use to be able to discern one thing from another. Two, we talked about that labels are not the same thing as they represent. For example, if someone learns in a different way, we don't want to say they're retarded, because we start treating them in a certain way instead of understanding the way that they communicate is different. We're going to go to point 3 and talk about derogatory language. Wow, what a powerful area to talk about. Derogatory language is when you use language that uses cuss words or words that are made to degrade or meant to degrade people or make them feel bad. And that's what we talk about when we talk about emotional abuse. Derogatory language is destructive language, and derogatory language is when you use words that make people feel bad or that imply that they're not as good as other people, and then this disrupts the communication. For example, I live in a mobile home park. A mobile home park is a park where there are homes that are actually the size of homes, but they can actually be moved. But you can't just hook them up to a car and move them. You have to have a moving company come and move them. As opposed to a trailer park, and that has homes that normally can be moved with a truck or a car. And trailer parks have come to have a negative connotation. One of my friends insists on calling the place where I live a trailer park, And I know that we are missing words and semantics because this house can be moved, but I consider a trailer park to be derogatory, and I feel that he's insulting me when he continues to say it. We'll be having a discussion about that later with him. But let's go on and talk about some categories of words that are derogative. One is cursing. Cursing is using words that are considered profane or against our morals in any particular culture. Now, what may be considered a cuss word in one culture may not be considered a cuss word in a different culture, but cursing is one of the things. And I grew up in a household where we're not allowed to curse, and especially not children. Racist language is very derogatory. When you use words about people that are unflattering, or that, for example, calling somebody a sand dollar, that's racist. Or calling somebody a nigger, those are racist words. Although a lot of young African Americans use those terms, or calling somebody poor trash, those are not good. Even calling someone a copper in this language, in this country, may be considered negative. Or pig. Let's say calling a police officer a pig. That would be derogatory language. Ethnic slurs. Ethnic slurs you hear throughout society. I hear them all over my community because we are a very multicultural community, very diverse community, but people use a lot of ethnic slurs. Words that are negative about sexual identity, we don't want to use them. There's so many, I don't even want to start saying any today. Let me talk last about children. Wow. Sometimes I'm in public and I see people use very, very negative language toward their children. They call them names, they shout at them, they curse at them, and you can just see the child wither. The parent then is harming the child. We have to be careful about the way we talk about children. We never want to say derogatory things like you're stupid, you're a loser. I have a child he's a grown man now, but my youngest son is in his 30s, and he had a very difficult, troubled childhood. But I never, ever told him he was bad. I never said you're a bad child. I never said you're a bad person. I said you're doing things that are inappropriate. You're doing things that are hurtful, but you are not a bad person. Because if your mom tells you you're a bad person, wow, you don't have a very good chance of coming out to be a good person. So we have to be very careful about the way we talk to children, and we need to talk about them in a way, and talk to them in a way that's affirming, that's positive. Constant criticism. Whoa, I hear so many parents and families, the only words that they have to say to their children are criticism. You can't do this, you can't do that, you're stupid, you're this, you're that. Oh, you made a mistake, you're wrong. Constant criticism kills the self-esteem. And once your self-esteem is dead or is damaged beyond repair, then the person acts out in ways in society that are not good. So we need to stay away from constant criticism. We need to go to constant praise. When a person does something good, speak about that as opposed to talking about something that they didn't do well. Verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is when you use words and language to control another person, to reduce their self-esteem, and to reduce their self-worth so that you can control them. That's what verbal abuse is. And I learned about this from a hard lesson. I was in an airport one time and I saw this book called Verbal Abuse. And since I'm a professor, I thought, well, that'd be an interesting book to read, by Susan Forward. Susan Forward. And I read the whole book on the airplane, and I thought, well, my God, I do some things that are verbally abusive. I think we all do it one time or another. And I set out to change the way that I talk to people so that I would not be verbally abusive, especially when I was angry with them, or when I was angry with my children. Verbal abuse, as I said at the beginning, is so powerful that it can damage people for a lifetime. And in many states, verbal abuse is part of the child abuse codes, because we know that verbal abuse, even if a child is not being physically abused, can damage them for life. I hope that I'm bringing you to our next point, number 4, which is that words have power. You can never behave as though what you say is of no consequences. And I will use our recent political activities in Washington, D.C., and I try to stray away from political statements, but I will say this. Hearing the President of the United States say, come to the state capitol to take back your voting rights, is not the same thing as hearing Martin Luther King say, come to the Capitol to take back your voting rights. Two different people, they're interpreted in two different ways. Words have power. Words have so much power that in many societies, their origin mythologies show the supreme being as speaking something coming out of their mouth to create the world. That's how powerful words are. So we have to remember how we use them, who we're talking to and what we're talking about. Remember that words can facilitate relationships or they can break relationships. In other words, they can make relationships better or they can make them debilitated, which means that they're not functioning well. 2, pay attention to the language that you use with your family, your loved ones, your colleagues, because it can shape the relationship. And you always want to be in positive relationships with people, even if you don't like them. You don't want to be in abrasive, negative relationships because that reduces the quality of your life and the quality of their life. Pay attention to the language that you use. Telling people they're fat, they're ugly, they're stupid, they're too short, they're a loser. You don't want to use that language with people, not in your family, not with your friends, and not at work, not with your colleagues. Number 3, don't use curse words with people. Unless you're very, very good friends and you're in a community where people do that and they take it jokingly, you don't want to say curse words at people. I've seen video footage of people who talking to folks that they think are not American. Once I saw a video of a young lady who came to a park and she had Puerto Rico on her shirt because she was Puerto Rican. And people started accosting her in the park and saying curse words to her, saying you don't belong here because you're from Puerto Rico. Of course, they were stupid and didn't realize that Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, and therefore the people from Puerto Rico are American. But saying curse words is not good. Refrain from using sexist language. I don't like being called a girl, those sorts of things, because I'm not a girl, I'm a grown woman. But sexist language is something that diminishes women. It diminishes girls, and therefore you should not use it. It diminishes men when we use sexist language toward men, and we don't want anybody to be diminished by our language. Never use racist language. Racist language, even when you're in a community or you're in a group that uses racist language, you should refrain from doing it because it changes your attitudes toward people. It changes the way you interact with people. And so we don't want to use racist language. Use preferred titles. For example, in my courses, I require my students to call me Dr. Byrd. Now, I'm in California right now, but I grew up in the Midwest and the South where you call your teachers by their title, not by their first names. And I think that it makes a difference. For example, if you call your teacher by your first name, that means you're friends. That means that the teacher should give you special treatment. That means that the teacher should never press you to do your work. And so I insist that I'm called Dr. Byrd, not because I'm Miss Hoity-Toity and think I'm so good. I want myself and the student to remember who we are together. And when we're in the classroom, I'm the teacher, you're the student, and so therefore I have certain responsibilities. Not necessarily authority over you, but I have certain responsibilities that are afforded me by the state of California. So use titles and use positive descriptive words toward people. You don't want to say somebody is fat, you may just say that they're plump. I was in Walmart one day and I was walking through the aisle and I met this little girl who was sitting in a basket by herself. Her mom was somewhere else. I walked up and I was looking at clothes and she said, "Ooh, you're fat." Of course, I am fat, but I don't want to be called fat. So I said to her, oh, that's not a good thing to say. You don't call people fat. And she said it again, and I said, that's not a good way to talk to people, and we want to be nice, and we don't want to say fat. So she finally says, okay, you're not fat, you're slim. And I said, no, I'm not slim either. I am fat, but you don't say that. That's not a thing that you say. So I waited there for her parent. I never try to correct children without their parents. So I waited there for her parent to come back, her mom. Her mom finally came back to the basket, and I said, your daughter called me fat, and it would be nice if you taught her that that's not an appropriate way to speak. Her mother, of course, was mortified, like, oh my God, she said that? Yes, and she said that probably because she heard it at home. Her mama said it. So I never get angry with children. I always talk to them about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And I had the same thing happen to me walking in the parking lot. I walked by a car, and a group of white kids, white children, they were young children, called me nigger. And I didn't go to the car and curse at the children, because why? They're children. And why are they saying that? Because somebody taught it to them. A grown-up taught them. So I stopped at the car, and I said, that's inappropriate. That's not a nice thing to say. And they were stunned that I actually did that. But I stood at the car and waited till their mom came. And I said to their mom, here's what your children said to me. Maybe you need to be careful about how you talk at home. And then I went to my car. I had a number of things I could have said that I didn't say. But we talked this lesson about language. We talked about the importance of language, ending with the important point that language has power, and that the mouth is a powerful instrument, and that you always need to be aware of how you're using it. Language is used to label things. Labels and the things they represent are not the same thing. Derogatory language is destructive, and words have power. These are the 4 points that I've covered. Now, the language that we use about ourselves and others can make or break a situation. You need to use positive language with yourself. You need to use positive labels with yourself and with other people. Never seek to harm anyone by using inappropriate language. It puts negative energy in the air. And every piece of negative energy that you put in the air comes back to you. Support relationships with positive language. Be aware of who you're talking to. Something may not be offensive to one person that may be offensive to another person, so pay attention to who you're talking to. And the support that you give to them is mutual. When you support other people with your language, they support you. Now I want to end this lesson by saying that you need to pay attention to the talk. Be civil, be supportive, and be compassionate with your language and word choices. And when you speak to other people like that, they will speak to you the same way. Help yourself and others live their best life. Remember that language, like the tongue, is a double-edged sword. It can be used to help or it can be used to hurt. So use the helpful edge of your language. Use it to improve your relationships with others and improve the lives of others. Now, if you want to learn more about this topic, please look at the link below, where you will be able to find a PowerPoint that gives you more information about language. And I'm glad you've joined me today. I will end with the words of one of my favorite people, Mr. Spock, on Star Trek, who says, live long and prosper.